Have you ever had a regret? Something you thought, you look back on and you say, I should have done that, but I didn't do it. You know, like just something in life. I remember years ago, my parents banished me. We were living in Papua New Guinea and you couldn't continue your education in years 11 and 12. So you had to come to Australia to complete that education at the Australian standard. And so they banished me to Australia to boarding school. And I did year 11 in boarding school, then year 12. And in year 12, and in the school, everybody had to play sport. That was just the way it was. And I played rugby, and I was playing on the first 15 rugby team coming into year 12. And they decided they were going to do a trip to New Zealand. And they thought this was a great idea to somehow or other, really just vamp up our team and make us a lot stronger team. And I decided not to go. I decided my parents couldn't afford it. And I just told myself that. And I didn't go. And so I sort of got left out of the team. And these guys all went to New Zealand. And they went there for I don't know how many days, but they played 9 games and lost all of them. And they weren't playing their first 15s. They were playing their thirds and their fourths. And we were a really good team in New South Wales, where we were. We were in Orange in New South Wales, and we were a good team. And they just got a hiding, one game after another. But they came back, the most excited rugby team. And when they came back, we had the best season ever because we did this pre-season. And the team playing together, even though I fit back into the team, I always knew I missed out. All the stories they would tell and all the things that happened to them in that time. And I look back and I think, if I'd had my time over, I'd have done that. And I missed out. And it's interesting because over the years, and that was my introduction into New Zealand rugby. Just the stories. And I didn't even go there. And everybody in the school was just enamored with just how extraordinary the culture was within the schools. They were all in private schools that they were playing, and these boys were just so determined and so incredibly good. Then, of course, you go on to see the All Blacks play, and they just play. And I'm convinced that New Zealand men to this day live for the next All Black victory. It's like the next one's coming. And if they lose, it's rare, it's very rare. So I think we've got some good news coming into Australia because so many Kiwis are relocating. And they just keep coming, and they migrate, and then they change citizenship, and they're part of this country. I think eventually there'll be so few people left in New Zealand that the All Blacks will be here, and we can get rid of the Wallabies, and we've got the best team. Maybe not. But it's the culture in New Zealand. We don't have anything like this in this country. Nothing like this. There's something extraordinary about their love of the All Blacks and this team and this game. And it's part of what goes on. I couldn't help but think that there's so much about other countries we don't understand. And I'll never understand this, by the way. And I wasn't part of that group. And I'm always going to be an outsider looking in. And realizing that it's quite a remarkable story. But if you look at when we try to understand the Bible and we try to look back 2,000 years into the age of Christ and we look at the phenomenon, everything that was taking place within those regions, whether it's in the Galilean region or whether it's down, toward Jerusalem or whatever, I really don't think we can grasp what it's like unless you were part of that culture. And so we're always going to be outsiders looking in and trying to read through our scriptures and try to understand things. And In the day of Jesus, the Roman occupation had just really unraveled them, completely unraveled them. And the Roman area was right on the Sea of Galilee where their headquarters were. And there'd been a lot of not only Jewish people living in there that had come back or part of the Assyrian group that had somehow or other been established there, but your Samaritans, all these different people groups that are living there, as well as the Jewish people living up around the lake. And they saw things differently. And what I want to do today is take us to the most familiar passage probably in church teaching. Jesus feeding the 5,000. It's common. We know this story inside out. In fact, it's in 4 Gospels. Often you don't see, I'm going to take it out of the Gospel of John, chapter 6. Often you don't see these stories in all 4 Gospels. Quite rare. You might see it in 3 or 2 or 1. But in this, it's in all 4. And this story. And it was a time when people were so upset about the occupation of Rome and then the cruelty of Rome that they lived with, the anxiety that they had. You know, we talk about being anxious. You know, I'm looking at what's taking place in Israel today and Gaza and the anxiety of rockets coming and going and war and it's just overwhelming. Well, I won't actually be able to feel that. I can look on the news and I can talk to people and I can even travel there and have a look. But I don't really understand. I don't understand the people groups. I don't think like them. I'm an outsider looking in. And so when we look at the story of Jesus, we need to make sure that we don't try and put ourselves into the story and see it from our perspective only. It's hard to do this, by the way, because naturally we've already decided what we believe about God. Like this, God's like this, and this is like this, and the Bible's like this, and I've studied this, and this is the way it is. And sometimes we need to look at it, realizing I can learn from this. And I want us to look at the culture that Jesus was developing. I want to look at that because the whole saga of Jesus coming into this region, his message was about the kingdom of God that had come. You know, there was a point to this fact, this kingdom, this rule and reign of a king, and he's the king. And so they aren't really sure about Jesus. A lot of people are not sure about Jesus, in fact. Certainly not that who he is in the sense of being the king of Israel at this point in time. It's early on in the ministry. He's quite popular. And so Jesus is going out and performing all sorts of miracles. He's healing people and the stories are just spreading everywhere. And I think this is where they actually saw some hope. But I also think they just marveled at the fact that the phenomenon of a miracle, have you heard about Jesus? The lame walk, the blind see, the lepers are healed. And this is like spreading. And there's no social media. This is just one-to-one in the villages. And then he's coming into their regions and he comes and goes. And the people are so excited about Jesus. And in this story, in John chapter 6, I'll read from verse 1. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near, so there were things that he was preparing them for. And when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, you see this? So there's a great crowd coming to them. They're sitting on this mountainside. And if you've ever been there and they show you the site that is by the Sea of Galilee, it's more like a hill, but anyway, the mountainside. He says to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? So there's this bucket load of people coming up to see Jesus. He's with his disciples. I'm sure he's telling them some wonderful things about life. But he asked this only to test him. For he already had in mind what he was going to do. So he asked Philip, this is kind of odd really if you think about it. So he asked Philip, where are we going to buy bread for all these people? Imagine what Philip's put on the spot instantly. But Jesus already knew what he was going to do. So he knew he was going to feed them. And there was going to be a miracle take place. But he invited Philip to think this one through. Have you ever felt like God has tested you? No, I don't mean temptation. That's a whole different deal. That's the wrong person. But tested you. It's like you've got an opportunity to do something. What are you going to do? And you know what I mean? Like, in that moment, there's a problem here. How are you going to do this? And I think this happens to us time and time and time again. That we're presented with a problem. How many times do we think that if you come and become a Christian, then there are no problems? What happens is like this. So Jesus is close with the disciples, talking to them about the kingdom of God, their lives, how this is going to impact them. But he's actually creating a culture within the disciples. That's what he's doing. This was what they did way back in New Zealand's era with All Blacks, I'm convinced. They created this culture that was going to win. Well, look at it today. What's the largest religion on the planet? Christianity. Now this is the nucleus of development, is these guys with Jesus. This is the beginnings of how this would take place. And so he says that to Philip. And Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. It's impossible. He's the accountant of the group. That wasn't his role, by the way. But he's calculated that. And I think this happens time and time again in our lives. We're never going to be able to afford to do this. We can't do it. Immediately we go to money in our lives. Because if we have enough money, we can solve all our problems. But here is Jesus asking him that question. He's testing him. He knows what he's going to feed them, right? And Philip, the first calculation that comes out of his mind is, it's impossible. So with the culture, right, he's trying to shape his disciples so that they see things differently. Because he could see all these people and all they could see was, we got a problem. We're not going to be able to feed these people. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will that go among so many? So here we have someone just thinking just a little bit differently. Creatively, how can I get this kid's lunch? we can use this kid's lunch. You know, here's this boy showed up and mum packed his lunch. I don't know how he showed up with this fish and loaves. They're probably small fish and probably really small loaves. But there's a creative person in the group, all right? Because he's figured out, Andrew, it's Simon Peter's brother. He was the one that actually brought Peter to Jesus. You know, he's the one we're looking for. He could see the future. Now, Philip couldn't. Philip's going like, it's never going to work. It's just never going to work. And yet Andrew could, maybe we can go down this road. I feel sorry for the boy a little bit because he was put on the spot. Maybe he volunteered his lunch. I think they requisitioned it. But this was the culture within the disciples. And Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. I read this yesterday, and I thought to myself, I've often thought about this location, and one of the things that came to mind was the grass that's always got to be cut. And here it goes. There was this area that it was a grassy patch. That's what it was. And if you go there today, you can see this area, and where they think that it was that Jesus performed this miracle. And that was the first thing that came to my mind was there's a lot of work here, just cutting the grass. You know, you may not do it, but Bruce just faithfully cuts grass with his group of people that, you know, Peter and the boys, you know, like, he keep cutting the grass. But you ever thought that this is a great place? That somehow or other people are going to come for one reason or another. This is going to show up. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, when did the miracle happen? Did it happen when Jesus prayed? Did it happen when they went to distribute it? When did it all come together? I don't think they thought this was going to happen. I mean, I know for a fact that Philip didn't. They're not going to eat anything. And you know what I mean? Like, that's what he thought. He thought, no, it's never going to work. You're not going to be able to feed these people. And yet, there was just this little avenue. And Jesus used that, and there was enough for everybody. Have you ever done without? Has Jesus ever shortchanged you? There's always enough. There's always going to be enough. This is what you live with. Jesus will never shortchange you. What will take place in the miracles of life, not the way we expect it. Not everything works out the way I want it to work out. I've even thought the wallabies might come through on occasion. It doesn't. Never happens. Not much. But do you see this? Like, do you understand this? Like in life, we're trying to figure things out. We're trying to figure out, I think, the future. What is possible? And it really does come back. Money plays a huge part in our lives. That if there's enough money, we're going to be able to, but if the money's going to run out, we're not going to be able to do what we need to be able to do. And this is always the case. Instead of saying, hang on, what have we got? What do we have? And then looking for what has God given us? What do we have? And we use this. And I think this is important for us. When they'd had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled with 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. And Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. And so there was that moment where Jesus knew that they're not going to see me for the type of king that I really need to be. That I'm going to be this suffering servant. and that my entry into Jerusalem and then it's going to culminate in my death on a cross, because that's not the picture of a king that they wanted. You know what I mean? Like we can look back and we can read into it and see that, but at the time they can't see that, and all they can think of is, surely this one that can perform these great miracles, we need. He's the one. He's the one God sent to us. You know, and so in that moment, the disciples learned something. Sure, the crowd were absolutely, elated by the fact we got a meal. We showed up at the concert of Jesus on the hill, and he fed us. But the disciples are sitting there scratching their heads, tracing back to, well, we were just all alone, and we knew we couldn't feed these people, and they knew where the miracle came from. I suggest there'd be a lot of people wouldn't have a clue how they arrived at all this food, this bread and the fish. But those closest, and so it's the same in our lives, right? I want you to bring this back to culture, what God is shaping in our lives. Now, what was taking place here, this is the mission of God. Jesus coming, and he is gathering together this group of people that they are going to have a role. Cami, my wife, said to me a couple of weeks ago, said, maybe we need to talk about how we grow. Like we need to grow. Spiritually. Well, yeah. You see, you'll find that there's tests along the way. And Jesus will call you into something that you cannot do. And then you'll see the response. We have like Philip, or we like Andrew. Will we see a way? Well, we've got this. Or we just say it's impossible. And so often in our lives we forget that faith is action. It's connected. And James talked about this. That this is part of the outworking of our faith. Is action. And it wasn't just a matter of reaction, but it was like, no, in this moment we're going to do something. In that moment. And so it's in the church. I think the church has got, and I mean church, especially in the West right now, it's being unraveled in so many different ways. You only just listen to these songs that they were singing right there. And that's the sentiment that's coming through. That it's not as easy. So many of us can think back to church in 1984. I remember living in Jacksonville, Arkansas. We dressed in a suit. You could tell you were a fine Christian if you dressed in a good brown suit. That was the color, brown. Yeah, that was it. And you had a big Bible under your arm. You knew how good a Christian you were. Well, that's changed. And it really wasn't a good indication anyway. Because you look back and you see some of the things that unfolded in people's lives and you go, that wasn't a telltale sign at all. See, God does something on the inside of us where he presents us with these changing times. And that's what was happening for Israel in that moment of time. They're living with all this Roman occupation, and surely they're thinking, we need a king to kick out the Romans because that'll work. I want to be comfortable. I'm so tired of being uncomfortable. I'm so tired of all this anxiety. I just want to have everything right. And he didn't do it. And we're living in a nation right now that this would be one of the biggest problems we've got. It is mental health. It's loneliness and the upheaval created by social media. Now everybody's got friends on Facebook. You know? Theo, we're friends on Facebook now this week. Is that right? You realize we have a friend called Jack? Yeah. I don't know. He's your friend and he's my friend. Go check that out. I know Jack. You see, there's a shift in how we relate to one another, how we connect with one another. I want to do something radically different this morning. We came into church. You know, I hate going to church, and a new church, and they do a meet and greet. That's not me. I just don't like them. Well, we're going to go beyond that. That's easy. Here's what we're going to do. Is I want you to pray for one other person. So 2 people get together and pray for one another. That's it. That's the only direction I've got. So we would break up now, and you'd find someone that you're not friends with. You can't pray for your kids. No, they got to go to somebody they don't know. Because here's what happens at church. We think church is predictable. But it's not. We're living with, we've got all these boys outside. And you can look outside and you can say, we've got problems. Or we're never going to reach them. We are. All right? But if we can't pray for one another and be uncomfortable, we will never talk to these boys. Because we're so used to just talking with the people we're used to talking with. And if we would just think this through, be uncomfortable this morning, because that's where we're going. We're going to be an uncomfortable church. We're not going to have the same format where it's so predictable. These young fellas, they're going to be a future. And you wonder what God's doing in their lives. Don't discount them. Don't discount the future. Don't discount the miracles. You go, no, it's too hard, it's too hard. So that's what we're going to do. Before we even come back to worship, come back and get the music team up here. I know it's we don't do this. Baptists never change. Are you ready for that? Because I thought about it, and I thought we need to just pick somebody that we wouldn't normally pray with. All right, can you do that? They've got lots of spots around here, and don't be in a hurry. And I've already picked out who I'm going to pray with. I'm going to pray with Cruz. Now, Cruz last week drew a picture. And his artwork was just beautiful. And I thought, that's a young man, and God's put his hand on his life, and he's going somewhere. And so I want us to see the future. I don't want us to live in the past. I want us to see the future. I want to see what's here. And you're like, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't know how to do that. That's fine. Just be silent with somebody. It's okay. But I'm putting you on the spot. But I think this is what we've got to see in a culture. If we are not willing to be radically altered in the mission of God, we're going to miss this opportunity. You say, I had a chance to do that. I was at this church and I had a chance to step into the unknown. I don't want you to live with regrets like I do about my New Zealand trip. I missed it. And I can't go back, not in the same way. And we've got this moment in time where we're going to have Christmas on the December the 3rd. I've already talked to the boys. They're all going to come and help, right? Started talking to them. Yep, John, we're all in on that. And there's going to be, I don't know what they're here for. They're here to ride their bikes. They're not here to go to church. But I see a miracle coming. I see the fact that this is what God has given us, and we're going to get on with it. Can you do this, Cami? All right. You know who you're going to pray for? Think it through. Okay, good. There you go, Timmy. Set. Pick somebody. Let's go.